Hello again, thanks for choosing us. I'm Ernest Menu. Members of Parliament have expressed concern over the increase in military coup and the surge in political instability in the sub-region, warning Ghana is at risk if Parliament fails to show leadership. The latest coup attempt in Guinea-Bissau is the fourth in the Sahel region in less than 18 months. Earlier, there were coups in Burkina Faso, Mali and Chad. The Guinean President Umaru Sissoco Embalalo said coup was failed even though several lives were lost, adding he is still committed to the fight against corruption.
I was in the middle of the Council of Ministers with all the members, including the Prime Minister, and we were attacked with very heavy weaponry for 5 hours. But now everything is under control. When I was elected president, I promised to fight two things: corruption and drug trafficking. And this is also linked to that.
The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the coup attempt is totally unacceptable. He's urging the military to return to barracks.
Don't know yet the details of what's happening. It is for us clear that coups are totally unacceptable. We are seeing a terrible multiplication of coups, and our strong appeal is for soldiers to go back to the barracks and for the constitutional order to be fully in place in the democratic context of today's Guinea-Bissau.
ECOWAS has already condemned the action, and heads of member states will gather in Accra tomorrow for a meeting on the increasing number of cases in the sub-region. Ahead of that meeting, Ghana's parliament has been discussing the issue. Yes, the Majority Chief Whip, Frank Anodompre, urging his colleagues to guard against conduct that seek to undermine the country's democracy.
We are all professing various counsels to the continent. But we must also look within. Speaker, it cannot be justified under any circumstance that members of parliament will reduce arguments, intellectual arguments, to fisticuffs. And you have people who are targeting the seat of the speaker. It cannot be the case. And if we continuously engage in that, we are preparing the grounds for the unfortunate. Speaker, so it's high time we also reflect. This parliament, and growing up as a young student leader, I have never witnessed MPs going after the speaker's seat. I have never seen that. Both sides, we need to reflect. The ruling class must reflect, and we are part of the ruling class. You cannot at one time or at one hand condemn coup d'etat, and at another hand surreptitiously and physically trying to attack the Speaker of Parliament. For me, that is a form of a coup d'etat. Anybody who engage in fisticuffs in Parliament here is fueling and facilitating coup d'etat and must be condemned in no uncertain terms. Speaker, quite recently we were...
Well, Anodompre was contributing to a statement read by the Northern MP Samuel Okudzeto-Ablakwa, lamenting about the recent insurgence of coup in the sub-region.
I am convinced coups are not a panacea to Africa's hydra-headed and intractable socio-economic challenges. That said, we must all concede that the promised democratic dividend has remained largely elusive on the African continent. The only real solution to the coup epidemic, as the UN Secretary General calls it, cannot be AU and ECOWAS sanctions. African leaders need an urgent, bold and robust Marshall Plan to address regional insecurity, acute unemployment, lack of opportunities for the youth, marginalization, corruption, nepotism, proliferation of arms, insurgencies, dictatorships, economic mismanagement, foreign exploitation, and clueless leadership. Africa's version of democracy, which has been a sham at best in many jurisdictions, and has rather produced a political and economic elite beholden to nepotism, cronyism, corruption, opulence, and high-handedness, often laced with blatant disregard for the rule of law, cannot be kept in place. Mr. Speaker, it is time for the African Union and other sub-regional bodies such as ECOWAS to institute an independent monitoring and evaluation system that assesses the democratic health, stability, and economic well-being of member states for frank peer review as a proactive measure to forestall more coups. This independent assessment must be conducted regularly by credible African CSOs or foundations in a transparent and scientific manner. Their findings must be made public to both enrich the African democratic discourse and also assure citizens that their leaders are paying attention to what really matters to them.
While other MPs in the chamber contributed to the statement.
Clearly, one key factor that we must not discount in all this is leadership. Democracy is supposed to be an efficient mechanism for producing the best leadership for our people. But it seems democracy is failing in several respects in Africa in helping us elect the best leadership. We end up having clueless leaders, as the maker of the statement has made. We end up having leaders that are greedy, selfish, incompetent, and do not use the democratic machinery to solve the problems of the people. When democracy does not solve the problems of the people, the social and economic and security problems of the people, people will be discontented and they will hail any undermining of democracy. And that is why I am not surprised that in all the countries that the military coups have occurred, the population has come out to hail and applaud the military overthrows. It is because the people have been living with governments that are clueless, incompetent, are not solving their problem, and all they see is that the members of government or the ruling elite only care about themselves, their welfare, the welfare of their families, and they are feeding fat on the poverty of the people.
With the greatest of respect, that I believe it is the sanity of permitting democratic governments to perform, for better or for worse. For a long stretch of time, that has accounted for the kind of economic development that we've seen with, for instance, America and the United Kingdom. But where the constitutional journey is punctuated by coup d'etats, Honourable Speaker, you can see that somebody believes he's a savior. And you see the masses sometimes very excited that a government has been booted out. And Mr. Speaker, came to a point where we all decided, including Ghana, that democracy is the way of life. Democracy should be what we should practice, where decisions are taken inclusively, where major decisions are made with major stakeholders and every stakeholder in the country. Grassroots democracy became the choice of word. And at the end of the day, a lot of African countries embrace democracy.
Now, some experts have predicted more of such coups if the appropriate measures are not put in place. Former Chief of Staff of ECOWAS Commission, Ambassador William Awenado Kanjire, tells JoyNews it is time to take our human security more seriously.
We watched the video of our president in his opening remarks at the last ECOWAS summit. He did indicate that no one is immune. But of course, depending on the trajectory of your country, you are less immune than others. For me, what is the key lesson here is that governance and the quality of governance is very key in determining whether we are going to have more insecurity or less insecurity. We take security too much for granted. So we need to unpack security. Especially, we need to unpack human security in order to inform the kind of governance and security governance that we will practice. Intelligence, if you look at the nature of our religiosity in Ghana and the rest of Africa. I think it's the manifestation or the practice is more subversive to our development than development enhanced. We must develop the mind as well. The educational content and pedagogy, which comes from the colonial experience that we are still holding on to, so hard, that it baffles me, that also needs to be addressed right from childhood, including peace education, including educating the children on human rights, basic human rights. If you look at some of the countries that are making it, like the Scandinavian, even the US, right from early stages, the children are exposed to peace education, human rights, including the respect of the national flag, the national anthem, and things like that. There is an entry point for non-state actors in terms of engaging with the state side, which does well, but also has slippages. And like she said, you need to cover it. The CSO side also has a lot of contribution that it's been making and continues to make, but it also has slippages. And together, let's enhance the strengths and minimize the weaknesses. So my advice is use the member state level as an entry point first, not the regional. The ECOWAS has a framework which compels member states to create national committees for integration, which is supposed to be state institutions and non-state. It is clearly spelled out. Media, heads of media houses are supposed to be part of it, among other CSOs, private sector. If you check the 15 member states, even if it is created, it is not functional. So are you surprised that we are in this state of lack of information, very little implementation?
Let's do more on this story. Let's go to Zoom now. Emmanuel Bombande is a conflict resolution expert and a senior UN mediation officer, also former deputy foreign affairs minister. Thank you, sir, for joining us. A few days ago, we hosted you, and the conversation was about Burkina Faso. Today, we are talking about Guinea. Is there any merit in the suspicion that there are individuals or a group of people instigating these takeovers because of the serial nature of it?
Well, first of all, we have to appreciate that contagion is a factor in which some military people see what is happening to be the right time, and that the environment is also appropriate, because if they take over, then it simply joins the narrative rather than being treated separately on its own. We cannot discard that. But I will quickly add that each country is different with its own specific and peculiar nature of how we understand and deal with these issues. For example, one of the members of parliament talked about a generalization of corrupt leaders. You see, in the midst of what is happening, let me say very clearly that the president of Burkina Faso, Roch Christian Kabore, is an example of a president who was delivering on good governance, but failed if you look at it in terms of protecting the civilian population in terms of security.
Okay.
If you listen to the president of Guinea-Bissau, Umbalo, and people know him for that, he's fighting corruption and he's fighting the use of the trade in narcotics. That has always brought Guinea-Bissau to its needs. So we cannot assume that elected leaders as we have them are not delivering on good leadership, though that is not general. I think what is important is that in every situation, ask yourself, what is the root cause? What is the underlying issue? If you go back to the debate in parliament, if you don't want fisticuffs in parliament, ask yourself, how do we prevent that? If you don't deal with the root causes, tomorrow there will be fighting in parliament. Let's not pretend. So what you do is, decency requires that you understand the underlying causes, respect rules and regulations, and deal with it. And I think the others that your guests have been adding on all come to add on. And I would conclude on this remark by simply saying, all the things that Ambassador Kanyigri mentioned, all the things that some of the members of parliament said, none of them is achievable without political will. Take Ghana. Where is the political will to even decentralize? We cannot agree to elect our district chief executives. So in the same way, the protocols are clear. The ECOWAS instruments are clear, but there is no political will to internalize them and domesticate them at national levels. And so we keep on talking only when the crisis emerges, but we don't have the capacity to prevent.
We'll come back to ECOWAS shortly, but you mentioned Parliament. The MPs have expressed concern tonight about how their own actions could undermine the country's democracy. Is it far-fetched to say that these exchanges could create grounds for some radicality?
The nature of our parliament and the nature of democracy, which allows frank and open debate in our parliament, also comes along with how you raise issues in such a way that the issues that you raise, you are tough on the issues. And nobody should ask that our parliamentarians should not be tough on the issues. You are tough on the issues, but then you are soft on the people. In other words, you understand that it is human beings who are relating with one another in the debate. So the rules and regulations allow for you to have respect for one another, in the humanity of one another, see yourselves as belonging to the same country, but raise the issues and be tough on the issues with the respect for one another. If you go around and you communicate in a way that you cannot carry the people along to support you, or the type of communication is to mislead and to represent, then you are not able to manage how you handle the issue. And that is when you begin to see this semblance of violence. And that is why we must always ask ourselves, what is the underlying root causes? And how do we ensure that we are tackling those root causes to prevent the violence?
Now, just before you go, Mr. Bombande, let's talk about ECOWAS. Tomorrow there's a meeting to discuss these growing issues in the sub-region. What do you expect?
Yeah, so first of all, let me begin by saying the ECOWAS institution is functioning. And however the challenges we've come into at the present time, we must appreciate that we have a regional organization that is working. Now, interestingly, 2 decades ago, when we were putting these protocols and treaties in place, it was precisely because we always knew that when we come across this type of challenges, we are prepared to deal with them. Can you imagine if we do not have these instruments? We will be like groping ourselves in the dark and trying to find our way out. But those instruments allow us to see a clear way forward. And what is that? To be brief, number one, we want to restore constitutional order in the countries where the coup d'etats have happened. Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso. We are somewhat relieved that the coup did not succeed in Guinea-Bissau, but it's good that the president is instituting a commission of inquiry so that they can study it and make sure there's no repetition. Now, when we are able to do that, 2, we must have the political will to emphasize prevention. And the political will comes to the good governance. And I don't need to repeat all the things that have been said. Yeah. But good governance is something that happens daily. It's the institutions of the state functioning, the transparency with which they function, holding one another accountable. And respecting that holding one another accountable does not mean I'm against you if I raise issues against you. It is the nature of democracy. Whilst we do that, let's bring those instruments to be applicable on the ground and to function effectively. What does that mean? Without going a bit too long on this, the political will, as I said, that the revision of the treaties, no president should be able to stay in office more than 2 terms. And that when a sitting president who has been elected democratically is trying to change the constitution, just as we are trying to deal with the military coup d'etat, we must also hold that president accountable. And whilst we do that, respect for our constitutions, constitutionalism, and ensure that the institutions of the state function to the satisfaction of everybody. When we do that, one thing we do is that the inequalities that are widening when people feel they are being left behind, those gaps begin to close.
Okay.
And when those gaps begin to close, peace would be permanent. In addition to, of course, promoting our human security through the ECOWAS conflict prevention framework. And I end on saying that the slogan for the Sustainable Development Goals is very simple: that no one will be left behind. If we leave people behind, there will be violence. So I'm happy that there is a certain tiny minority in Ghana making it, having private jets, having a private jet terminal. Let those who have it, but the resources must be distributed for everybody to be included so that there is equity. Otherwise, you fly in your private jet and you cannot come back to land.
Mr. Bombande, it's always a pleasure to have you discuss these sub-regional issues with us. We are grateful for your time. He's a senior UN mediation officer and a former deputy foreign affairs minister. Tomorrow, the meeting happens here in Accra. We'll bring you details here on JoyNews.